In AD 410, the Roman Emperor Honorius sent a goodbye letter to the people of Britannia. He wrote, "Fight bravely and defend your lives. You are on your own now." The city of Rome was under attack and the empire was falling apart. After they left, the country fell into chaos. Native tribes and foreign invaders battled each other for power. Many of the Roman towns in Britain crumbled away as people went back to live in the countryside. But even after they were gone, the Romans left their mark all over the country.
AD 43, all the peace and quiet was shattered because along came the Romans. Now they had tried to come about 100 years before AD 43, but it was a rough day. They'd all come across on their ships, and there was a lot of ships were wrecked, and they found what they called the barbarians, but it was us Brits, on the shoreline with their chariots, and some with no clothes on because they thought they were more threatening undressed that way. They turned around and went back again. They didn't come, they didn't stay. Okay, so AD 43 they come again, and again, not to be in friendship. They don't want to live alongside the Britons. They want to take over, and they want to force the Britons to work for them. So a lot of Britons became slaves, and the Romans would obviously boss them about, tell them what to do. If they resisted, they were killed, they were put to death. An awful lot of Britons were put to death. But often, as long as they put down their weapons, they were left to get on with their farming. As long as they didn't interrupt what the Romans were doing and they got on with their bit, the Romans left them to it.
The bulk of the population was rural and engaged in agriculture. From a total population of 3.6 million at the end of the 4th century, the urban population was about 240,000 people, with the capital city of Londinium having about 60,000 people. Londinium was an ethnically diverse city with inhabitants from across the Roman Empire, including natives of Britannia and immigrants from continental Europe, the Middle East and North Africa. There was also cultural diversity in other Roman British towns, which was sustained by considerable migration both within Britannia and from other Roman territories, including North Africa, Syria, the Eastern Mediterranean, and continental Europe.
They eventually invaded a sort of like a line which went sort of like to York from, I think it's from Exeter to York. There's sort of like they went as far as that, and that was really because in those areas much more agricultural produce could be gathered, and that's their initial idea. But of course, eventually they kept proceeding further and further, and we've heard about Hadrian, of course, Emperor Hadrian. I think it was 300 AD, something of that nature, built Hadrian's Wall, and it's really because beyond that the tribes, where we have Scotland today, were rebelling, and they would be kept out, and that would be heavily patrolled by soldiers with various bases along in the towers, where they sort of lived, really barracks really. And a lot of the towns we have today are actually sort of based on Romans. The Romans brought about, of course, Romans brought London about. It's because of the Romans that we have London. And sort of initially the city of London was trading for trade. A lot of using the River Thames, built where it is because at that time that's as far as the boats could go upriver, and of course they would bring in goods that's as far as they could go. You see, the boats, that's why they was built where it was, and then travel out on the as the tide was going out, you see. And called Londinium, obviously, at the time, as became London as it is today. And but we still have some of the roads as well. Some of the road systems, they would build roads very straight, and there are part of the A303 actually going west to Devon today. It's actually very straight, and that's because it was at one time built on an old Roman road. And also they provided water systems which far more advanced than anything that had been in place before. Like at Bath, for example, there's an area of hot water springs. They turned into effectively Roman baths.
The Romans introduced the idea of living in big towns and cities. Roman towns were laid out in a grid. Streets crisscrossed the town to form blocks called insulae. In the middle was the Forum, a big market square where people came to trade. After the Romans, the next group of people to settle in Britain were the Anglo Saxons. They were farmers, not townspeople. They abandoned many of the Roman towns and set up new kingdoms, but some Roman towns continue to exist and still exist today. If a place named Chester, Castor, or Kester in it, it's almost certainly Roman. For example, Gloucester, Doncaster, and Manchester. The word Chester comes from the Latin word castrum, which means a fort. London was a Roman city too, although they called it Londinium. When the Romans invaded, they built a fort beside the River Thames. This was where traders came from all over the empire to bring their goods to Britain. It grew and grew until it was the most important city in Roman Britain.
Houses would not be like this one, which is a farmhouse. They would perhaps be a bit more like the houses in Rome. So they would have pillars, they would make themselves up quite a comfortable place. They would have underfloor heating. There's only one room in this farmhouse that has the underfloor heating, but they would have all that. So they made themselves quite comfortable. There's been lots of evidence found where the Roman cavalry was, where big stable areas were. So they did a lot of building. They did a lot of road building. This is where we come to what did the Romans ever do for us? And certainly the roads, instead of those dirt tracks that us Brits were happily poodling along with our ponies and carts, they would build these lovely straight roads using their measuring instruments. They'd march up and down them. So they tried to take over, basically.
In the Roman Empire, the Latin word castrum was a building or an area of land used as a fortified military camp. A castrum could be applied to various fortifications, from a large legionary fortress, auxiliary forts to temporary marching camps. When the Romans arrived on the shores of Britannia around 43 CE, they built a series of forts over hundreds of years that stretched from the southern coast of Britannia and as far north as the Moray Firth around Inverness in Scotland. Fort construction even carried on into the last centuries of Roman Britain. With the construction of Saxon shore forts to deter and provide protection for the inhabitants from Saxon and Frankish pirates.
The internal arrangements follow one general plan. While in later forts the buildings are all of stone, in Claudian and Flavian forts wood is used throughout. And in many forts as late as 160, only the principal buildings seem to have been constructed of stone. In the centre of the fort was the headquarters, a rectangular structure with a front entrance which gave access first to a small cloistered court, then to a covered hall bordered by a row of 3, 5 or even 7 rooms containing the shrine of official worship and the pay and record offices. These filled the middle third of the fort. In the other 2/3 were barracks for the soldiers. No space was allocated to private religion or domestic life. The shrines which individual private worshippers might visit, the bathhouse and the dwellings of shops of the camp followers lay outside the walls. Such were nearly all Roman forts in Britain, differing little from those in other provinces.
Britain had no proper roads before the Romans, they were just muddy tracks, so the Romans built new roads all across the landscape, over 16,000 kilometers in fact. The Romans knew that the shortest distance from one place to another is a straight line, so they made all their roads as straight as possible to get around quickly. They built their roads on foundations of clay, chalk and gravel. They laid bigger flat stones on top. Roman roads bulged in the middle and had ditches either side to help the rainwater drain off. Some Roman roads have been converted into motorways and main roads we use today. You can still find a few places where the original Roman road is still visible too.
Steps by which these results were reached can to some extent be dated. In 49 CE, a colonia or municipality of time-expired soldiers had been planted in the old native capital of Colchester, and though it served at first mainly as a fortress and thus provoked British hatred, it soon came to exercise a Romanizing influence. At the same time, the British town of St. Albans was thus sufficiently Romanized to receive the status of municipium, which at this period differed little from that of a colonia. London became important. Romanized Britons were numerous. In the Great Revolt of Boudicca, 60 to 61 CE, the rebels massacred many thousands of them, along with actual Romans. The movement increased over the next 15 to 20 years. Tribal capitals sprang up, such as Silchester. The hot springs of Bath were exploited. Another colonia was planted under Domitian, emperor from 81 to 96 CE, at Lincoln, and the third at Gloucestershire in 96. The fourth, established on the west bank of Ouse at York, belongs to the early 3rd century and marked the upgrading of an existing town. A series of judicial legates were appointed to attend the increasing civil business.
Before the Romans came, very few people could read or write in Britain. Instead, information was usually passed on from person to person by word of mouth. The Romans wrote down their history, their literature and their laws. Their language was called Latin, and it wasn't long before some people in Britain started to use it too. However, it only really caught on in the new Roman towns. Most people living in the countryside stuck to their old Celtic language. We've still got lots of words and phrases today that come from Latin. Words like exit, which means he or she goes out, and pedestrian, which means going on foot. Modern coins are based on a Roman design, and some of the lettering is in Latin. Written around the edge of some £1 coins is the phrase Ducus et tutamen, which means glory and protection.
This is a collection of coins. Most of them are from the late 3rd century, a time, well, it was not really the best time to be in the Roman Empire, the late 3rd century. They were killing emperors very quickly at that stage. But it's a place where we talk about Roman money and the money that Roman soldiers were paid. So we know, for example, that the soldiers of the 20th Legion, when they arrived here, they just had a pay rise. They were being paid perhaps 300 silver denarii a year, a basic Roman soldier's wage. And that's actually quite a lot of money. I've seen various estimates of how you try and translate 300 denarii into modern terms. But the best way of looking at it is that 100 denarii is about the minimum you need to survive at that time. So 300 denarii is a good wage. A centurion could be earning 10 to 15 times that. The tribunes were largely of the equestrian class, and there was a property qualification. You had to own property worth 100,000 sesterces, which is about 25,000 denarii. No, it's 1 to 4. So yeah, about 25,000 denarii. The man in charge, the legatus, he's a senator. He has to have property worth 1,000,000 sesterces, 250,000 denarii. So the man at the top, he's got 250,000 denarii, and the common soldiers have about 300 denarii a year. That's the kinds of money that's going around, if you like. Of course, 300 denarii isn't exactly what you get, because you lose a certain amount of that for various deductions like food, bedding, training equipment costs, clothing. You're contributing towards your pension. But even so, you still have quite a lot of money left over for spending in the Cannae Legionis, that part of the civilian settlement that is built outside the fortress. Here in Diwa, it's outside the east gate, and that's where the soldiers go and seek various forms of recreation, shall we say.
An important part of Roman society was its shops and markets. Roman cities were lined with marketplaces where craftsmen created and sold their goods. These shops were small rooms on the lower floor of a house that the craftsmen either owned themselves or rented as a space to sell their goods. In early Roman history, most of the goods sold in these shops were made by the person selling them. However, this changed as Rome grew. Over time, a class of middlemen began to sell their products of others and acted as a wholesaler for many types of goods. Wealthy Roman citizens would send their slaves to the markets in order to do the shopping. Poorer Roman citizens would have to do their own shopping and were often most concerned with purchasing food. The poor focused on buying bread straight from the oven, porridge and vegetables such as beans and lentils.
So we have a collection of various different kinds of Roman pottery. Roman pottery, obviously you can talk about the coarse wares, the basic orange and darker coloured ordinary, if you like, the kind of pots and pans that you would use on a regular basis. There is some Samian. Samian is a fine ware. It was made in factories in France, shipped all over the empire. It's a very distinctive, shiny orange coat, which is very easy to notice. And we also have some Roman glass. I love Roman glass. It's amazing stuff because of the quality. I've worked on archaeological excavations where you can take a piece of Roman glass out of the ground and it looks like somebody just dropped it. Whereas a piece of medieval glass that is 1,000 years younger is just falling apart because it's not the same quality. Roman glass is really, really good stuff. And we have some Roman glass here as well, which is rather nice.
One aspect of Roman influence seen in British life was the grant of Roman citizenship. At first, this was granted very selectively to the council members of certain classes of towns, whom Roman practice made citizens, to veterans, either legionnaires or soldiers in auxiliary units, and to a number of natives whose patrons obtained citizenship for them. The granting of Roman citizenship was gradually expanded and more people from provinces became citizens. One way for a provincial inhabitant to become a citizen was to serve in the Roman army or a city council. The number of citizens steadily increased as people inherited citizenship and more grants were made by the emperors. Roman life was not always about negotium, work, and revolved much around otium, leisure. As much as they devoted their lives to their business, both upper class and lower class, they believed that fitness and recreation are equally important. The upper class would be occupied by their power struggle, while the lower class would farm and fish. The latter inherited the games that aristocratic emperors played, which were inspired by either the Greeks or the Etruscans. The Roman board games included dice, tic-tac-toe, marbles, checkers, chess, etc.
Every culture has a dance, and ancient Romans are no exceptions. So ancient Romans dance was inspired by Greece, mostly by Greek slaves, and Roman themselves, they didn't participate in dance. They thought dance was below them, so they hired Greek and Spanish dancers for their banquets, parties, birthdays, weddings, also for their funerals. Eventually, these Greek dancers opened dance schools, and Romans sent their kids to these dance schools, and that's how the dance came to Romans also. There are dances that are natives to Romans, such as belly crepa. Belly crepa is a dance that was introduced by Romulus, which is the founder of Rome. In this dance, the warrior would wear the full armor, and they will go up and down Rome's city just before a war. And in this way, they would demonstrate their strength, synchronization, and power. I guess you can compare that with today's military march. Priests also had a dance called Pyrrhic or war dance. In this dance, priests also would wear a full armor. They would hold a shield on their left arm and a staff on their right arm. Priests would also perform fertility dance. Other popular dances were Bacchanal, which was in honor of the god Bacchus, the wine god. I think some part of this dance is still danced in South and Central America. Romans believed that You should dance with your whole body and soul, influenced by religion. And also they would tell stories mostly about the goddess and gods of the time. And these stories were told by dancing without words, so they call this pantomime or miming. Pantomime could also include musicians and singers. Pantomime has two main parts. One part is the dancing, the movement, which dancers could teach each other, and one part is the miming. Miming was reserved for very good dancers. Dance was usually made in lines, and the best dancer was the leader of the line.
Having its origin in ancient Greece, the ancient Roman theatre breathed fresh air with its grand arenas and theatrical nuances over time. One could witness diverse forms of art such as acrobatics, street performances, nude dancing, articulated tragedies, etc. Since the time the Roman Empire evolved, musicals and theatrical performances were staged by professionals in every public and religious festival.
Roman amphitheater were a type of Roman. They were basically open venue, mostly circular or oval. They were different from the traditional circus or hippodrome because they were used for mostly the most famous gladiator combats, animal slaying, and executions. We don't know yet when the first amphitheater were built during the Roman, but there were some records showing that the first important amphitheater were built during the 2nd century before Christ, and then start to grow in terms of popularity since the imperial time, when every city, important city in Imperial Roman, were basically part of the suburb of the city, and then entertaining basically all the people living in that area. Now, amphitheater is basically the meaning of amphitheater were basically the all-around venue, basically, and the venue were used for most of the attractions that there were at that time. The main thing about the amphitheater that were quite big, they could reach a capacity around 40,000 to 60,000 people, and the biggest one, like the Colosseum in Rome, could reach up to 100,000 people in the same event. But with the centuries, the amphitheater started to decline in popularity. Most of the causes were because gladiators started to disappear from the public life. They were not anymore making entertainment combats due to various reasons, mostly economical, because the gladiators were quite expensive, and also due to changes in religion, for example, when the Christianity were starting to take over. They were against this type of combats because they were saying that were abominable and it was a waste of money. Although the animal slaying continued to make events and be popular, but around the 6th century after Christ, they start to decline in the same way because of the higher cost for these animal combats, basically. So what happened to the amphitheaters? They start to be abandoned or vandalized, or some of them they were destroyed, and the same material used to build something as some other buildings that were necessary. Some of them they're still surviving nowadays, most of the famous are like the one in Rome, most of the also France and UK, some of them you can still see them, and they were nowadays they are protected as a monument, historic monument, and most of them are still open to as a visitor attractions, and few of them, like a couple of them that are still used, like the Verona Arena and the arena in Nimes in France, they are still used for nowadays musical concert or classical theater plays, and and this is the one that you can visit all around the year and is open to the public. And how we say in Italian, fino a che il Colosseo esisterà, Roma esisterà.
Gladiatorial games were one of the most celebrated and anticipated games in Rome. The crowd would burst into fits of cheering, the swords would slash and clash with each other and outperform one another. If the crowd liked the defeated's performance, he would be spared another day, but if not so, then the defeated would be mercilessly killed. Death was a sort of entertainment in Rome. The Roman gladiators were the acquired slaves or prisoners of war or criminals who were sometimes pushed into ruthless killing to get freedom. Occasionally, women volunteered to become gladiators to free themselves. It was not merely for entertainment, but also a political tactic to glue the people's mandate together. When the ruler of Rome gave them what they wanted, he expected the public's utmost loyalty in return.
the Romans started to leave around in the 400s AD. It's really because their empire was under attack from all the tribes all across Europe, and they just didn't have the soldiers to sort of support the empire, and they left. I'm not quite sure. It was 400 and something. The Roman soldiers left, and that's when we started having invasions from the Saxons, from where we have Germany today, Saxony, and they were easily more powerful than the Celtic tribes. And then after that, of course, the Normans, in the 11th century. So we've been subject to one invasion after another, really. So we're a sort of broad mix, in our DNA of all these different invading forces in Britain today.
We tend to take the material remains of the Roman past for granted. The towns, the monumental architecture, the villas, the luxury trades, the decorative and fine arts. But in many parts of the empire, all this was very new, and the speed with which it was adopted is therefore a mark of the attraction to native elites of the new cultural package. It was a fashion revolution at the top of society, to keep up with one's peers, to elevate oneself above the lower orders, to get on under the new regime. One became Roman. Different ways of life and value systems could coexist with the dominant Greco-Roman culture of the elite. Roman archaeology is revealing ever more of the cultural diversity of the empire, and increasingly we sense that different ways of life, worldviews and value systems could coexist with the dominant, more uniform Greco-Roman culture of the elite.